First step is to mix up some epoxy resin. This batch is going to be for the fiberglass knife blank, so I'm also going to add some glow powder. This is the swatch that came with it, so I can use this to make sure that the color for the knife blank portion looks good with the green glass, as it looks once it's cured. This is a very thin fiberglass, so it took quite a few layers to build up the thickness to make the blank. Using a heat gun periodically also helps to pop any air bubbles that are in the mix. I didn't degas the resin on this. It would have been better to put that into a vacuum chamber beforehand, but I wanted to test and see how much of a difference that really makes. For the glass, it doesn't make too much of a difference, but it still, I think, does help somewhat. For the carbon fiber, I believe it definitely makes a difference. So degassing is best practice for sure. The resin used was a long setting resin, so I sped up the process by putting it into a heat tent with a space heater. The next piece will be for the knife scales, so I've cut several layers of blue glass forged and green glass forged fabric. In this case, I tested out laying the pieces with the forged side up to get more of a marbled effect, but in retrospect, it's much easier to work with if you simply place it with the forged side down in the mold so that you can work adding resin from the non-woven backing that keeps the forged in place. Again, I didn't degas the resin here, and in retrospect it would have been much better to degas it because I did end up with quite a few voids. Another way of speeding up the cure process, if it's a small project like this one, is just to wrap it in a heating pad, as long as it's a heating pad that doesn't have an auto shut-off, and you do of course have to be careful that it doesn't overheat. Because these pieces were quite thin, they were hard to hold on to, so I added some tape straps to the back to make it easy to lift the items and set them on the belt sander safely. The rubber belt cleaning block is invaluable during this process, otherwise the belts get so gummed up with the dust that they stop being as effective quite quickly. And I went through to finer belts on these and got them to a flat and relatively smooth surface, although this will be improved later on. I printed out a template on some adhesive paper for the knife blade and for the scales so that I could ensure those were placed properly onto each of the blanks with the most efficient use of material, and then cut them out using the Dremel. A diamond cutoff wheel is great for composite materials like this. It creates masses of dust trimming these and then shaping them, so I've got a shop vac set up, and then of course you've got to wear masks still. I stuck the two halves of the scales together so that I could shape them at the same time, ensure they were the same shape. And then with the rough shape cut out, I marked the center line on the blade by first putting some silver Sharpie and then using a drill bit that was approximately the right size to mark that center line. Some of the shaping of the blade, the rough cutting basically, was done on the belt sander, and then I did the finer sanding using a permagrit block and regular sandpaper. With the blade shaped but not yet sharpened, I needed to decide what pattern to engrave in the knife scales. So I did a few different sketches on some clear plastic, and then the one that looked best, I just traced a couple of patterns and stuck those onto the scales as a guide for shaping. The bulk of the shaping was done with a sanding barrel on the Dremel. This reveals some of that blue carbon fiber that's underneath, just a little bit of an accent around the edge, and it also makes the green portion look more marbled and interesting. And finally, it also gives you a much better and more comfortable grip. I had quite a few voids in my scales from not degassing the resin and from not properly compressing it, so I added some resin on top to start filling those in. I also added some resin onto the blade to fill in any tiny voids and to start the smoothing process. I did 2 coats on each of these. When there's excess resin around the edge of something like this, the best option is to catch it before it's fully cured. So at this stage it's more rubbery and is very easy to trim away with a sharp knife. The finer shaping for the knife blade was done with some sandpaper taped to a piece of glass for a nice flat surface. At this stage I'm not yet fully sharpening it, just getting the correct shape into the blade. To attach the scales, I used some of the same resin and clamped those together to cure. I added some packing tape to the ends of each of the clamps so that just in case some resin was on there, the clamps wouldn't end up stuck to the knife. And at this point my Dremel had died, so I used some files to do the final shaping with the pieces all attached together. So I'm evening everything up and then also texturing the sides of the handle. It's much more comfortable and has really good grip this way. Next I'm adding a light layer of resin just to give it just a bit more gloss. The sanded finish is nice, but it really brings out the color of the green glass and the depth of the carbon fiber when it's a little more glossy. I'm not going to a full gloss on this, So to create the semi-gloss look, I'm adding the resin on top and then wiping most of it away with a lint-free cloth, because the surface has already been sanded and cleaned, just enough sticks to give it a bit of a sheen. Ultimately, I did 2 coats on the handle and just 1 additional coat on the blade. And yet another method for speeding up the curing process for something small like this, you can just stick it into a box of some sort and then wrap the heating pad around it. Gets the heat right where you need it and helps the resin to cure significantly faster than the standard cure time. The final step is just to polish up the handle a little bit to remove any small bits of dust that might have gotten into the finish, and then also do the final sharpening on the blade.